He spent over 5 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, labeled a murderer, abandoned by the system, and nearly executed until one forgotten report and a loyal dog unraveled everything. This is the extraordinary true story of Marcos Oliveira, a man silenced by injustice but saved by truth, love, and quiet resilience. What began as a tragedy slowly transformed into a powerful lesson in redemption. But what happens after the court sets you free? Where does a man go when the world has already moved on without him? Stay with us, because his journey is just beginning. A gray, reluctant dawn filtered weakly through the narrow windows of Pedra Alta prison, as if even the sun hesitated to witness what was about to unfold. In the sterile hallways of the maximum security hospital wing, the rhythmic thuds of the guards' boots echoed like a slow countdown, each footstep steeped in a quiet dread that clung to the concrete like a shadow that refused to lift. In one dimly lit room, Marcos Oliveira lay shackled to an iron-framed hospital bed. The single hanging lamp cast a harsh glow on his face, revealing exhaustion etched into every line. For days now, sleep had come in scattered fragments, too much in some hours, none at all in others. By sunrise, he would be moved to the final holding cell beside the execution chamber. 2 hours after that, if protocol held, they'd deliver the lethal injection. No family, no friends, just silence. The only warmth in his final days came from the occasional visit by Father Damião, the prison chaplain whose words were gentle, even when laced with doubt. But despite the weight of time and inevitability, Marcao clung stubbornly to one last wish. "I want to see Rajado before I go," he repeated to the guard standing watch, his voice hoarse but clear. Rajado. His dog. A Brazilian fila, with brindled fur and soulful eyes, who had been his one constant, his anchor, since before the arrest. Marcao had raised him like a son. Dr. Lucia Ferraz, the prison's director, entered the room. Her presence composed and commanding. Her expression was firm but not unkind. "Mr. Oliveira," she said carefully, "introducing an animal into a high-safety facility isn't standard procedure. We'd need authorization, and, frankly, we don't even know where the dog is." "I do," Marcao replied, the gravel in his throat barely masking the tremor beneath. "He's with Clara Viana, my ex-fiancée. She still takes care of him. I know it." He tried to sound indifferent, but the tightness in his voice betrayed him. His eyes pleaded where words couldn't. "If there's any compassion left in this place, please, let me see him." The director hesitated. Something flickered across her face, a glimpse of conflict beneath the professional mask. "I'll look into it," she said quietly. "But don't get your hopes up." Marcao gave a slow nod. Hope was a fragile thing in a place like this. He had spent 5 long years denying the crime, proclaiming his innocence to deaf ears. After countless appeals and rejections, few believed him anymore. Perhaps only Father Damião still entertained doubt, though even he had admitted, gently, that questions lingered. As the director left, hushed voices floated down the hallway. "There's another protest forming outside," one guard murmured. Marcao felt it. Part of him worn down by guilt, another part defiant, fueled by a quiet belief that maybe his death could spark something more. But the world beyond the prison walls no longer mattered. The needle was coming, and no opinion could stop it. He stood, slowly, his legs stiff, his body aching from confinement. He shuffled to the small window in the wall, barely a slit, just high enough to glimpse the horizon. Only a thin streak of light pierced through. Morning was coming. The sky blushed with a faint orange tint. It reminded him of walking through the sleepy streets of Villa Serena at dawn, with Rajado trotting beside him. For a heartbeat, it felt real again. He could almost feel the dog tugging gently on the leash, tail swaying joyfully. People would stop and smile. "Is he yours?" they'd ask. "With pride," Marcao would answer. "He's something special, always has been." A sharp knock on the door pulled him back. An officer appeared. "Oliveira, it's time." Marcao swallowed hard, the request still lingering on his lips. "Any word on my last wish?" he asked. The guard hesitated, then turned away. "I've passed it up the chain. But don't count on it." Without resistance, Markal held out his wrists for the cuffs. After all these years, the clank of metal against bone felt almost ordinary. As he was led away, he cast one last look at the fading light outside. He wondered if he'd lived long enough to see the sun break through. Across town, Clara Viana pulled into the driveway of her modest rental home. It was just after 6 in the morning and she hadn't slept. Her heart tightened at the headline flashing in her mind. "Execution set for Marcos Oliveira this morning." Inside, curled up on an old blanket in the corner, Rajado stirred. The dog, once lean and energetic, had grown heavier, his steps slower over the years. But when he heard Clara's footsteps, his ears perked, and he lifted his head, alert. It had been 5 years since he'd last seen Marcao, and yet something in the air made him restless. Clara knelt beside him, running a hand over his familiar brindled coat. "You miss him, don't you?" she whispered. Rajado didn't answer, but in the stillness his soft whine was all the truth she needed. Clara stood frozen in the kitchen, her hand resting on the pile of unopened letters. The morning air was still, almost reverent, as if the world itself knew what day it was. Her eyes scanned the paperwork scattered across the table. Old appeal forms, notes to prosecutors, unanswered letters to journalists. Ghosts of a desperate fight for justice. Deep down, Clara had never doubted Marcao's innocence. The case had always felt off. A partial fingerprint on a gun, fuzzy witness statements, a supposed financial motive that never quite made sense. And yet, despite every inconsistency, one clear and polished accusation had sealed his fate. She had begged the new district attorney to take a second look. She had written everyone. No one responded. The machine had already moved on. Her phone rang, jolting her from her spiral. "Hello?" she answered, breath tight. A calm, firm voice responded on the other end. "Miss Viana? This is Director Faraz from Pedra Alta Prison. I'm calling regarding Mr. Oliveira's last request." Clara's pulse quickened. "Is there a change? Has the governor—" "I'm afraid not," Faraj interrupted gently. "There's no suspension or delay. The execution will proceed, but Monsieur Oliveira has asked to see his dog, Rajado, one final time. He says the dog is in your care." Clara nearly dropped the phone. Her throat tightened. He still wants to see Rajado?" "Yes, it's highly irregular, but we've received conditional approval from the Secretary of Corrections. However, you must arrive within 90 minutes. After that, it won't be possible." The words hit like a thunderclap. Clara didn't hesitate. "I'll bring him. We'll leave in 5. She hung up, turned to Rajado, now alert, tail wagging, and saw in his eyes the same urgency she felt in her chest. Maybe he didn't understand what was happening. But maybe, in the way dogs often do, he understood everything. She dropped to one knee, gently cupping his face. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Let's go see your brother." Her voice broke mid-sentence, but she steadied herself. There wasn't time to cry. She threw on a jacket, clipped Rajado's leash, and they rushed out to the pickup. As the engine roared to life, Clara felt the weight of the day close around her like a storm cloud. This was all that remained of Marco's life. A dog, a memory, and a promise unkept. The roads were nearly empty, but Clara pushed the speed limit, her eyes darting to the sky as dawn streaked the clouds with shades of rose and amber. The world looked beautiful in that terrible moment, as if unaware of the sorrow unfolding beneath it. In the rear-view mirror, Rajado sat quietly, nose pressed to the window, letting out soft whimpers as they neared Pedra Alta. His sadness echoed her own. Clara's phone buzzed again and again. Friends, perhaps strangers who had seen the morning headlines. She ignored them all. There was only one thing that mattered now, giving Marco this final moment of peace. But anxiety gnawed at her. What if the permission was revoked? What if she arrived too late? What if some obscure rule crushed this fragile thread of mercy? She gripped the wheel tighter. "Hold on, Marco," she whispered through clenched teeth. Just a little longer. Somehow, every traffic light turned green, an improbable string of grace that pushed her forward. She reached the prison gates just in time. The tall fences and coils of barbed wire loomed like a steel mountain. 2 security checkpoints later, a guard approached her vehicle. Clara rolled down the window, her voice trembling. "I'm here for Marcos Oliveira's last request. I brought his dog, Rajado." The guard scanned his clipboard and gave her a silent nod. He pointed to a side entrance. "Pull over there. Wait until we confirm clearance." Clara parked, reached into the back seat, and rubbed Rajado's head. "We're almost there, boy," she murmured. "You're going to see him soon." The dog leaned into her touch, resting his snout against her hand, as if to say, "I know." She closed her eyes and pictured Marcao. How thin he must be now. How much time had carved into his face. Did he still have that mischievous dimple on his left cheek? Did he still smell like that same old shaving cream? Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly. She had to be strong. For him. For both of them. A heavy steel door groaned open. A different guard stepped out, signaling for her to enter. Meanwhile, across the city, Inspector Renato Barros adjusted his tie in front of a mirror, the reflection showing a man worn by years and secrets. His hair was now silver, his once firm posture slightly slouched. After 3 decades of service, retirement was a breath away, marked by the gold watch on his wrist. But Renato hadn't slept. For 5 years, the conviction of Marcos Oliveira had haunted him. He was the lead investigator, the man who built the case that put Marcao on death row. At the time, it had seemed solid. A fingerprint, a vague eyewitness account, suspicious bank activity. All the elements of a conviction. But something had never sat right. Lately, his old partner had begun to confess doubts, holes in the case, witnesses whose stories didn't quite match, a victim whose criminal history had quietly vanished from official records, evidence that was never thoroughly examined. And then there was the money. Those deposits the prosecution claimed were blood money, no source ever confirmed. The city saw Renato as a hero, a man of justice, but justice was supposed to mean truth. Now, with Marcao's execution set for that very morning, Renato found himself in the courthouse basement at dawn, sifting through dusty archives and rewatching old interrogation footage. The more he read, the more his gut twisted. The timeline didn't add up. The victim, a shady businessman named Sergio Drummond, had enemies far more dangerous than Marcao. But the system needed a conviction, and Marcao, a poor man with a checkered past, was easy to blame. Renato's phone buzzed, a message from a contact inside. "Final appeal denied. Execution proceeds at 9. If you're going to do anything, now's the time." Renato stared at the message. His heart pounded. Would he finally break ranks? Or let a possibly innocent man die? At the public prosecutor's office, Inspector Renato Barros sat in his car, paralyzed by a decision he wasn't sure he had the courage to make. His gut twisted. He had considered walking into the prosecutor's office and announcing what he knew, but he couldn't. Not yet. He had tried to raise doubts quietly, asking his superiors to reconsider the evidence. But no one wanted to reopen a closed case. A conviction, after all, was a win. The city slept better believing a dangerous man was behind bars. Justice to them had been served. But Renato knew the deeper truth. Sergio Drummond, the murdered man, was no saint. A real estate mogul with deep pockets and dirt under his nails, Drummond had ties to nearly every powerful politician in town. His funeral was broadcast like a hero's farewell, but those who had seen the underbelly knew better. Marcao had been the perfect scapegoat, disposable, poor, unconnected, easy to frame. At 7:20 IMM, Renato checked his watch, then pulled out a prepaid burner phone he rarely used. He dialed a number from memory, an old contact in digital forensics. "AP, it's me," he said quietly. "Listen, I need a rush job. I don't have much time." He explained the situation, asked if his contact could scan for latent fingerprints on old evidence. something, anything that might point away from Oliveira. Maybe it was too late. Maybe it was foolish. But Rajado needed to know he had done everything possible. If this really was the end, he couldn't carry the weight of silence for the rest of his life. His leather jacket felt heavier than usual, not because of the weather, but because inside, tucked close to his ribs, was a pistol, a habit, an instinct. He wasn't expecting a confrontation, but after 3 decades in law enforcement, he knew better than to travel blind. He drove through the gray, mist-covered streets of the city, past early morning traffic and joggers unaware of the storm quietly brewing in his heart. In his mind, the past replayed itself, the first time he had interrogated Markel. The man had seemed confused, not calculating, afraid but not evasive. "I didn't do it," Marcel had said. Calm, too calm. Over the years, Rajado had questioned killers, con men, liars. And yet, Markel's eyes had never fit the pattern. Rajado pulled into the lot of a public library, closed at that hour but still useful. Its guest Wi-Fi reached the parking lot, giving him the privacy to upload files to his digital contact. From a USB stick, he transferred old forensic reports, prints, and scanned interrogation transcripts. He sat in the quiet hum of the car's engine, fingers tapping the steering wheel. In the silence, he thought of the man Marco once was, an honorably discharged Army veteran, a security professional with a clean record. His life had collapsed so fast, too fast. The more Rajado reviewed it, the more orchestrated it all seemed. His phone buzzed with a new message. "Give me 1 hour." Rajado typed back immediately. "We don't have an hour. Execution is at 9. Work fast." He started the engine again and turned toward the district courthouse. If by some miracle evidence came through, Rajado wanted to be the one to hand it in. If not, he had a backup plan. He would drive to Pedra Alta prison himself, walk in, and look Director Faraz in the eye. "I have reason to believe you're about to kill the wrong man." It would be career suicide, maybe even a legal risk, but if it bought a delay, a new hearing, a glimmer of justice, it would be worth it. The skyline of the city emerged ahead, towers of glass and steel glowing in the pale warmth of sunrise. The same city that once celebrated Rajado as a hero now loomed above him like a cold monument to silence. "Let this forensic lead be enough," he prayed. "Let it come before it's too late." But if it didn't, if the system held firm, he needed to know he had fought until the very last second. Inside Pedra Alta, Markel was escorted down a long corridor with no windows, the flickering fluorescent lights painting a sterile glow across whitewashed brick walls. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. At the end of the hall, a door opened into a small, bare cell, the holding chamber before execution. There were no windows, no clocks. Just a metal cot, a concrete floor, and a surveillance camera trained on his every move. The air smelled like disinfectant and fear. Guard Silva slid open a compartment in the door and passed him a paper bag. "Your last meal," she said quietly. Inside was a salad, a few pickles, and a can of guarana soda. Not because he was hungry, he wasn't, but it reminded him of a simple lunch shared years ago with Clara on the day they adopted Rajado from the shelter. Silva's voice softened. "They're preparing now," the director said. "You're going to see the dog." She hesitated. The weight of her duty hung in the air. It was clear she hated being part of this. "Thank you," Marshal replied, his voice fragile. He picked up the sandwich but didn't eat, just inhaled the scent. A flash of laughter, a shared glance. A life that slipped away like smoke through a crack in the door. He sipped the guarana, then set it aside and sat down, staring at the opposite wall. Would Rajado even recognize him? Would he still come when called? 5 years had passed. Dogs remember. But so much time, so much change. Yet, hope stirred. If Clara had answered the call, if Director Faraz kept her word, then maybe, just maybe, he'd see him again. Then, Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful. The door creaked open. Director Faraz stepped in, her face tense, eyes glassy, and in her hand, Rajado's leash. The moment the dog spotted Marcao, his entire body froze. Then, a bark, loud, sharp, familiar. And suddenly, Rajado leapt forward, his tail wagging so furiously it blurred. The sound of his claws skittered across the floor as he lunged for Marco, barking and whining in that half-crying way dogs do when they're overwhelmed with joy. An officer stepped forward to stop him. Faraz lifted her hand. "Let him go." Marco dropped to his knees. "Hey, champ," he whispered, arms wrapping around his old friend's thick neck. The dog pressed into him, whining, licking, shaking with excitement. His coat had grayed a bit, and his frame was heavier. A small white patch now marked his snout, something new, something time had left behind. Marcao buried his face into that fur, and for the first time in 5 years he sobbed. But it was in the dog's eyes, those deep amber eyes, that Marcao saw it. The same loyal adoration, untouched by time. A lump formed in his throat. At the doorway stood Clara, still and trembling. He turned to her slowly. "Clara?" he whispered. Just her name. Words failed him. How could language possibly carry the weight of everything she had endured, the lost years, the visits denied, the pain of watching a shared life unravel? "I tried, Marquillo," Clara said, her voice raw. "I begged them to look again. I wrote letters. No one wanted to listen. I'm sorry." He shook his head gently. "No, you've done more than anyone ever has." Director Faraz cleared her throat. Her voice, though still firm, held a trace of humanity Marcao hadn't expected. "You have 15 minutes, she said. "The chaplain will arrive shortly, then the doctor." Marcao tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Thank you for this." Clara knelt beside Rajado, who continued licking Markel's face with unrestrained joy. She reached for Markel's hand, and he held hers tightly. For a moment there were no words, only silence thick with emotion, pain, and unspoken forgiveness. "He's still yours," Clara whispered. "I never gave him away, even when people said I should. I couldn't." Marcello leaned his forehead against Rajado's furry head, inhaling the earthy, warm scent. It brought back memories of coming home after long shifts, finding the dog at the back door, tail wagging like a metronome of happiness. The world outside was still shouting, protesting, preparing to end a life, but here, in this small, fluorescent-lit cell, there was only quiet love, raw and pure. 15 minutes, Faraz gently reminded, stepping away. "I'll be right outside," Clara said, standing slowly. Her voice faltered. "I'll stay until your voice leaves me." She wrapped her arms around him tightly, one last time, and then the door closed behind her. Marcao was left alone with Rajado, though he was never truly alone, not in this moment. The director and the observing agent watched behind the one-way glass, but even their presence felt distant. Rajado nestled into Marcao's side, his massive paw resting gently on his chest. The dog groaned, nuzzling under his arm. "I never stopped loving you, boy," Marçal murmured. "Never stopped dreaming about those walks down the coast, teaching you new tricks. You kept me going, even when I didn't want to." He hesitated, the tears returning. He remembered the nights when the thoughts grew darkest, when hope was just a flickering flame barely visible behind iron bars. And yet, Rajado's memory was the anchor. The dog licked his cheek gently, sensing the heaviness. He couldn't understand injustice, or verdicts, or death, but he understood suffering and love. Then from the intercom above, the director's voice echoed. "Mr. Oliveira, your time is up, but I'd like to let Rajado stay with you until the chaplain arrives. You may have a few more minutes if you wish." Marcao looked up in disbelief. "Thank you, ma'am. Truly." Faraz's voice softened. "Only until the priest arrives, then he must be escorted out." Marcao nodded. He climbed onto the narrow bed, patting the spot beside him. "Come here, champ," he said. Rajado climbed up awkwardly, curling his strong body close. For a few more minutes Marco would have peace, something real to hold on to when everything else had been stolen. He closed his eyes. If this was his last memory, he could carry it with dignity. Outside the death row chamber, Clara leaned against the wall, arms folded across her chest, heart pounding in time with the distant echo of footsteps. She couldn't hear what was happening inside, only the occasional murmur of guards, the scrape of shoes, the shuffling of indifferent employees passing by on autopilot. Then a voice deep, weathered, cut through the silence. "Viana." She turned. A tall man stood before her, his gray hair neatly combed, dressed in dark clothing. There was something official in the way he carried himself, an old confidence, restrained but unmistakable. "My name is Renato Barros," he said, extending his hand. "I was the lead inspector on Marcos Oliveira's case." Clara stared at him, her body stiff. "Now?" she hissed. "You come now? He could be gone in minutes. Isn't it too late?" Renato nodded solemnly. "That's exactly why I'm here. Because I believe we made a mistake." Clara felt the floor shift beneath her. "You believe?" Her voice cracked. "You had 5 years. 5 years where he sat alone, waiting to die." Barros didn't defend himself. He looked down, shame coloring his face. "I doubted the evidence. Quietly. I followed leads the department wouldn't authorize, but I hesitated. I was afraid to destroy my own case. And I didn't have conclusive proof. Just too many loose ends." Clara's anger threatened to boil over, but exhaustion won out. Her voice was soft. "So what now? What do we do? We have 30 minutes before they inject him." Renato raised his phone. "I have a contact analyzing the digital trail of the victim's life, searching for anything missed, something that could prove the story was never complete. If we find something, we might be able to delay the procedure." He hesitated. "But even if we do, I need the director to listen. She's the one with the power to stop this now." Clara's voice trembled. "Marcao deserves that chance, even if it's by a thread." "I believe that too," Barros said. Together they walked down the sterile hallway, toward the administrative wing. Clara couldn't stop thinking of everything Marcao had endured. The isolation, the name-calling, the endless silence of being unheard. She wanted to scream at the system that had failed him. But she forced herself to stay present. They approached Director Ferraz, who stood reviewing paperwork near a frosted glass door. Clara introduced Barros. Ferraz's expression hardened into a cautious mask. "Do you have information that could affect this execution?" she asked. "Because we are very close." Renato drew a deep breath. "Yes," he said, "and you're going to want to hear it." "Are we on time?" Barros gave a sharp nod. "Yes, ma'am. We may be looking at manipulated evidence. If that's true, we cannot carry out an irreversible sentence. I'm asking for a short delay while I confirm the findings." Director Ferraz stared him down, her voice calm but firm. "Inspector, I can't delay an execution based on your suspicions alone. You know legal protocol. A delay has to go through the governor's office and be backed by credible documentation." "I understand. My contact is scanning Drummond's internal financial records. If we can prove those transactions were part of a laundering scheme, or that Marcao had no motive, it changes everything." Ferraz rubbed her temples. "I can escalate the request to the Detention Affairs Office and notify the governor's legal team, but if you give me anything short of hard evidence, they'll treat it as noise." Just then a prison staff member entered in a hurry. "Director, a call from the prosecutor's office. They're asking for you directly." Ferraz glanced between them, uncertain if it was fate or disaster knocking at her door. "Excuse me," she said, stepping aside. Clara turned to Barros, whispering, "Do you think your contact found anything?" "I don't know," he replied, "but if they haven't, I'll make noise myself, publicly. I'll call out procedural failures, weak chain of custody. It won't be airtight, but it could force a stay." She grabbed his arm, eyes wide. "If there's even a 1% chance, we can't let them kill him, please." Barhouse's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. Then his entire posture changed. A message from his contact lit up the screen. Found it. Drummond was receiving large transfers through shell companies at time of murder, sending files now. Waros's breath caught. We've got something. Bank records, hidden funds. It might be dirty money, or a frame-up. Clara swayed slightly, the weight of it all hitting her. That could be enough, right, to prove Marcow had no motive? Barros nodded slowly, eyes scanning the text. It proved Drummond was involved in something major. If we can tie this to a third party, we may have the link that proves Marco was set up. They didn't have to wait long. Faraz returned, her expression unreadable, but pale. Dar read it. The prosecutor's office says the governor may authorize a temporary stay if credible misconduct can be documented. Do you have anything I can forward? Barros held up his phone. Yes, let me send the files to your office now. Faraz hesitated, jaw clenched, then relented. Do it. I'll contact the governor's legal counsel myself. Clara's heart surged with cautious hope. It wasn't over. They hurried to Faraz's office, where a fax machine whirred and computer monitors flickered with new urgency. Barros typed rapidly, forwarding the files. Faraz had already picked up the phone. Yes, she said tightly. This is Director Faraz at Pedra Alta. I have just received evidence suggesting potential misconduct in the conviction of Marcos Oliveira. No, I'm not halting the procedure, but I am requesting an immediate 2-hour delay. Clara stood near the door, barely breathing. Could this actually work? She pictured Marcow in that tiny room, whispering to Rajado, thinking it was goodbye. She looked at Barros, his spine straight but his eyes filled with guilt. 10 agonizing minutes passed. Faraz hung up. They've agreed, she said. 2-hour delay, but only if we provide clear grounds for suspicion. No press, no leaks. Any disruption could backfire. Clara's voice was a whisper. He won't die today? If this holds up, Faraz said, I'll personally make sure he doesn't. Barros exhaled hard, nodding. We just bought ourselves time. If we can expand on this evidence, trace the funds to a known criminal entity, we can request a full suspension. Faraz's shoulders dropped slightly. Then we better move fast. Clara's hand trembled. Thank you, she said. All of you. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside Pedra Alta, history was slowing, perhaps finally rewriting itself. Inside the holding cell, Marcow sat with his back against the wall, his hand resting gently on Rajado's neck. The dog's warm body grounded him. A soft knock came at the door. Marcos, said a familiar voice. It's Father Damião. May I come in? Marco nodded. Please. An officer stepped in to escort Rajado out. The dog resisted, letting out a low, mournful growl. Marçal leaned forward and kissed the top of his head. It's okay, boy. Go on. With a pitiful whimper, Rajado was led away, the heavy door closed behind him. Father Damião entered quietly, wearing a simple clerical shirt. No robe, no tie, just presence. He placed a small Bible on the steel table and sat gently across from Marco. I hear they're preparing the execution room, he said softly. But I wanted to sit with you, unless you'd rather be alone. Marcow gave a weak smile. No, I'm glad you're here. They prayed together. Or rather, Father Damião prayed. And Marcow listened, half paralyzed, half hopeful, and for the first time in years, not entirely alone. As Father Damião's gentle prayer continued, Marcow's mind drifted, not away, but inward. He thought of his mother, long gone now, a woman who taught him to believe in second chances. She had raised him with so little but never lacked faith. What would she feel, he wondered, knowing her only son was about to die for something he didn't do? Not anger, she was too soft for that, but grief, quiet and unbearable. That thought hurt more than the cell ever had. The door creaked open. Director Faraz appeared, her steps brisk, her voice low. Father, she said, I need a moment. Damião gave Marcao a glance, curious, worried, and stepped outside without a word. Ferraz stepped in, her expression tightly controlled. "Oliveira," she said, "we've received information that raises serious questions about the circumstances surrounding Drummond's murder." Marcao didn't breathe. Ferraz continued, "Because of this, we've been granted a short delay. The injection has been postponed. You have 2 more hours." It took a moment for the words to sink in. "A postponement?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What does that mean?" "It means you will not die at 9 a.m. The governor's office is allowing a temporary stay until 11 while we verify new financial records. If these documents hold up, it could suggest a serious miscarriage of justice." Marco's knees nearly gave out. "Are you saying someone finally believes me?" Ferraz didn't blink. "Not yet. But someone is willing to question what we thought we knew." He turned away, blinking hard to fight the tears. His chest heaved. For the first time in 5 years, someone with power wasn't telling him to be quiet. They were listening. "I've said it since day 1, he whispered. "I didn't kill him." "We know," Ferraz said gently. "We're starting to see that now." She looked over at Father Damião, who had stepped back inside, eyes wide with cautious joy. "We'll keep you in this room under close supervision," Ferraz continued. "If the evidence checks out, the execution will be cancelled, officially." Marcao nodded, overcome. "Thank you," he said, voice shaking. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Ferraz offered the briefest of smiles, more solemn than warm, then stepped out, the lock clicking behind her. Father Damião returned to Marcao's side, sitting silently beside him. "Would you like to talk about how you're feeling?" he asked softly. Marceau swallowed hard. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not just of dying, of hoping, of what happens if this falls apart." Damião nodded. "That's natural, but hope isn't weakness, it's resistance." They sat in stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the intercom and the ticking of the wall clock. 915, 9:30, 9045. Each passing minute was a paradox, life extended but still bound to the threat of death. Marcao stared at the floor, then the ceiling, then at nothing at all. "If I make it through this, where do I go? What about Rajado? Clara? What's left of the life I lost?" He didn't know. And then, at 9:52, the door clicked open. Agent Rocha stepped in, followed by a blur of motion and a wagging tail. Rajado. The fila bounded forward, tail sweeping joyfully from side to side, claws tapping like music on the floor. Marcao froze. "What's happening?" he asked. Roger handed him a folded note. "Director Ferraz thought you might want company. She said, you both could use it." Marcao dropped to his knees and threw his arms around Rajado. The dog responded in kind, licking his chin, whining softly as if to say, "I missed you. I never gave up." Father Damião stepped back, letting the moment bloom. Marcao pressed his forehead to the dog's and whispered, "Maybe it's not over, kid. Maybe there's still time for us." For the first time since his arrest, something stirred inside him, raw, uncertain, but real. Back in Ferraz's office, Inspector Barrows paced while the director remained locked in tense conversation with the governor's legal team. Clara sat in a chair by the window, her knuckles white around a paper cup of cold coffee. The office clock read 10:05. Less than an hour left. Barros's phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He pulled it out, reading a message that made his eyes go wide. "It's here," he said. "My contact traced the shell companies." Ferraz paused, eyes locked on him. "They're all connected to a man named Valder Valgomes," Barros explained, flipping his phone around to show them the message. "A known fixer? Someone who forges evidence, buries leads, cleans up crime scenes?" Clara's breath caught. Carrozza's hand pressed to her earpiece. "Is he connected to Drummond?" "Yes," Barros said, "indirectly. Drummond moved money through those companies right before his death. If Gomes was involved, this whole thing could have been a setup. Either Drummond hired him to handle someone else, or someone used Gomes to take Drummond out and pin it on Oliveira. Faraz's tone turned sharp as she addressed the person on the other end of the call. "Do you hear that, counselor? We may have identified a third-party suspect with motive, resources, and a known history of corruption." Poirot stepped closer. "This calls the entire conviction into question." Clara rose from her seat, heart pounding in her ears. The last threads of doubt were unraveling fast. Faraz turned back toward them, still holding the phone. And for the first time in 5 years, the door to justice didn't just creak, it began to open. "Yes, that's right," Barros said firmly. "Gomes was never mentioned in the trial." Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. "I've read every article, every transcript. His name never came up. If this man was near Villa Serena that night, why wasn't he investigated?" Barros scrolled quickly through the new message. "We don't have physical proof yet, but the financial records show Gomes moved large sums around the time of Drummond's death, possibly bribes or payment for a hit. What we need is direct proof, a hotel receipt, a camera angle, a GPS ping showing he was there that night." Clara stood, hands clenched. "And how do we find that in the next 50 minutes? Before Barros could answer, the office door opened with a deliberate click. A tall, stooped figure entered, graying hair, severe face, and an air of command that quieted the room. Clara recognized him instantly from the news. Deputy Prosecutor Gade. He had led the charge for Marcal's conviction. The tension in the room went electric. "I was informed of new evidence being introduced," Gade said, gaze locked on Faraz. "I came to personally evaluate it." Barros stepped forward. "Prosecutor, we've uncovered multiple layers of hidden financial activity. Drummond was laundering money through shell companies tied to Valdier Gomes. The man's a known fixer. He fabricates evidence, launders cash, arranges hits. It's enough to raise serious doubts." Gaze raised a hand, cutting him off. "Unless you have irrefutable evidence, proof that Oliveira was nowhere near the crime scene, or that Gomes was, I will not support a suspension." Clara's voice cracked. "You wouldn't support a delay. Even if there's doubt, isn't that what the legal system is supposed to account for?" Gaddis's tone was icy. "Every prisoner claims innocence, Miss Viana. The murder weapon had Oliveira's fingerprint. The knife belonged to him." Barros shot back. "He admitted owning a similar knife, but he said it was stolen from his truck weeks before. That was never investigated properly. You didn't want to look deeper." Faraz ended her call abruptly. "Gentlemen, let's stay focused. We have a deadline. The governor's team needs proof, a direct connection between Gomes and the murder scene. If we don't deliver, the execution proceeds at 11. Barros tapped furiously on his phone. "I'm pushing my contacts for location data. We need anything that places Gomes in Villa Serena that night." Clara turned toward Guedes, tears rising. "If you have any decency left, help us stop this. An innocent man is about to die." For the first time, Guedes's mask cracked. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. I don't want to see an innocent man executed, but speculation about a fixer isn't enough. Show me hotel records, a security camera still, something that puts Gomes at the scene. Then." Faraz's office phone rang again. She picked up. Yes, understood." And she covered the receiver with her hand. Her voice dropped. "Your contact just confirmed it. A prepaid phone registered to Gomes pinged off a cell tower less than 2 kilometers from Drummond's estate at approximately midnight, the window of death." Barros's eyes whitened. "That's right near the murder scene." Faraz listened further, then added, "The call stopped abruptly just after midnight. It aligns exactly with the estimated time of death." Clara could barely breathe. "That means Gomes was there, or at least close enough to be the killer." Guedes remained silent. He no longer argued, but the rigid posture in his shoulders betrayed the turmoil building behind his carefully composed mask. "No," he finally muttered. "It doesn't prove Gomes killed Drummond, but it does suggest the wrong man might be in that cell." Perez nodded sharply. "I'm escalating this now." She dialed the governor's advisory board, relaying the new developments. The room fell into tense silence as she spoke. Then, finally, she hung up. They'll call back with a decision. Everyone stood frozen, time stretching in unbearable quiet. Then the phone rang. Faraz picked up. Her face hardened. Yes, understood. She lowered the phone slowly. The governor has ordered a full suspension of the execution. We have 48 hours to complete the investigation. Clara collapsed into her chair, tears pouring freely. 48 hours. Marcao had been just minutes away from death. And now, he had time. Faraz met her eyes, softening. This means Marcos Oliveira will not die today. Not at 11 a.m., not without a full investigation. Barros closed his eyes and let out a heavy breath. We made it. Thank God. Guedes stood rigid, saying nothing. But his silence no longer carried certainty. Only fear, for what had almost happened. Clara stood, her voice thick. Thank you, Director, for not ignoring what mattered. Faraz nodded solemnly. I never want to oversee the death of a man who might be innocent. She turned to Barros and Clara. Come with me. We need to tell Oliveira. In the quiet cell, time had folded into itself. Marco sat on the cot, legs stiff, one hand resting gently on Rajado's thick fur. The dog looked up at him from time to time, those amber eyes filled with quiet empathy. The silence was unbearable. Friar Damiao had left after the last update, and now every minute without news felt like a coffin slowly closing. Then, clank, the door unlocked. Director Ferros stepped in, followed by Clara. And behind her, to Marcao's shock, was Inspector Renato Barros. Marcao stood quickly, his pulse thudding in his ears. Seeing Barros was jarring, the face of the man who had once buried him. What was he doing here? Faraz's voice was calm. Mr. Oliveira, she began. We've just received confirmation from the governor's office. In light of new evidence, your execution has been postponed for 48 hours. Marcao blinked, stunned. Postponed, he whispered. You mean, I'm not. No, she said softly. You will not die today. Faraz gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. You won't be executed today. The words hit Marcao like a tidal wave. His knees buckled under the weight of 5 years of fear, silence, and despair. He might have collapsed if Clara hadn't stepped forward and caught him, her arms wrapping around his trembling frame. I'm so happy, Clara whispered through sobs, pulling him into a tight embrace. Tears streamed down both their faces. Rajado barked loudly, once, then again, his tail wagging like a victory flag. It was as if he understood the miracle unfolding around him. Barros stepped forward awkwardly. Mr. Oliveira, I'm Inspector Renato Barros, he said, clearing his throat. I was the lead investigator on your case. I'm here now because I believe there may have been an attempt to frame you. Marco's breath caught in his throat. He had long suspected corruption, or at least negligence, but hearing it spoken aloud by the man who built the case felt surreal. I told the court from the beginning, Marcao said, voice shaking, I didn't kill Drummond. Barros lowered his eyes. I had doubts. But I didn't act. No apology can make that right. But I'm doing everything I can now to make this right. Clara placed a gentle hand on Marcao's arm. We found strong evidence pointing to someone else. A man named Valdir Gomez. He has ties to Drummond, and he was near Villa Serena the night of the murder. Marcao exhaled, his shoulders trembling. So what happens now? Faraz stepped forward. We're reopening the investigation. If the new evidence proves your innocence, you'll be fully exonerated. Clara squeezed his hand. You could be free, really free. He stared at her, stunned. For so long, freedom had been nothing more than a dream behind steel bars. Now it hovered just out of reach, real, terrifying, and fragile. Rajado barked again and gently placed his paw on Marcao's leg, snapping him out of his spiral. Marco knelt and stroked the dog's ears, tears falling onto his fur. "Hey, champ," he whispered. "We've got more time, you hear me? We've got more time." Faraz glanced at the wall clock. "By protocol, we'll move you back to a secure cell, but not death row. You'll be held pending further review. Barros and Miss Viana will continue collecting evidence." Marco slowly rose. "Thank you," he said to Faraz, "for letting me see him, for not turning away." Perez hesitated before answering. "I only did what I hope anyone in my position would do, and I'm sorry for everything." Clara wiped her cheeks. "I'll keep visiting. I'll keep fighting. I'm not leaving you." Marco's voice cracked with emotion. "If this is real, if I do get out, I don't even know how to begin again." Clara smiled through her tears. "We'll figure it out. One day at a time." Perez signaled to the guard. "It's time to transfer Mr. Oliveira. The dog can stay temporarily, but we'll need to leave with Ms. Viana soon. We'll keep you updated." Marco bent down, hugged Rajado tightly. "I'll see you soon, boy," he whispered. He watched as Clara and the dog were led out. For a moment he raised a hand in farewell before the door shut again. But this time, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a waiting room with a door that might open. Barros lingered behind. "Oliveira," he said, voice low, "you have every reason to hate me. But I swear, I'm going to do everything I can to uncover the truth." Markov met his eyes. "I don't hate you," he said. "I was angry, still am, but if you can help make it right, do it." Barros nodded once, then quietly walked out, leaving Markel alone with a rush of emotions. He sat on the bed, body buzzing with the adrenaline of what nearly happened. In the corner, the sandwich he hadn't touched sat half-wrapped. He still had no appetite, but maybe later, when the shock wore off, he'd eat. Dream. Plan. Outside the cell, life continued. Radios buzzed, guards gave orders, doors slammed. But something fundamental had changed. The poison meant for that morning had been locked away. And for the first time in years, Marco didn't feel like a soul in limbo. He felt alive. News of the stay spread fast. Outside Pedra Alta prison, the crowd of protesters splintered into chaos. Some were outraged, shouting that justice for Drummond had been betrayed. Others cheered, raising banners that read, "Innocent until proven guilty." Life wins today. Clara pushed through the crowd, breath tight in her chest, Rajado walking beside her. Reporters descended like hawks. "Mr. Viana, how do you feel about the suspension? Is there real evidence Marco was framed? Will you seek compensation if he's exonerated?" Clara raised a hand, shielding her face. "No comment, please. I'm just trying to get home." A sharp-suited journalist stepped in her path. "Just 1 minute, Miss Viana." Marcelo Viana, TV Globo. But a firm hand gripped her shoulder. A uniformed officer stepped forward, pulling her past the mob. Let her through. He escorted Clara and Rajado to her pickup. She climbed in, locked the doors, and sat still for a moment, her chest heaving. Rajado whined softly and curled against her. "We did it," she whispered to him. "We bought time." She turned the key, drove out of the prison zone and into the rising tension of a city now on the edge of scandal. For 5 years people had clung to a simple narrative. Guilty man, justice served. Now that story was unraveling, and someone somewhere was going to have to answer for it. Her phone buzzed. No number. Unknown number. I can help prove Marcos Oliveira's innocence by creating illegal content targets to keep the information confidential. Clara frowned. She could be a lead or a trap. In a case this public, opportunists were everywhere. But she'd forward it to Barros. Let him decide. At home, she arrived at the small cottage on the edge of town. The living room was cluttered, half-packed boxes still lining the walls. She'd never really settled since losing Macau. Was Villa Serena even hers anymore? Barreau padded into the kitchen, sniffed at his empty water bowl. Clara filled it, set it down, then collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. 48 hours, she whispered. That's all we've got to prove it. Rajado returned, rested his head on the cushion beside her. She absently stroked his fur, her mind running like wildfire. We can't fail now. Meanwhile, Inspector Barros drove through the shifting light of late morning, the Villa Serena precinct in sight. He had just 2 days to fix a mistake 5 years in the making. And failure was not an option. Barros pulled up to the police station parking lot, the sky thick with late morning haze. His mind raced, not just with what he had learned, but with what he feared had been hidden all along. He was going to dig where others refused to, and he knew they'd hate him for it. Inside, the uniformed officers recognized him immediately. Some stared, others looked away. They knew why he was there. His name had once been etched into the Drummond conviction like iron. Now, he was back to tear it open. He moved swiftly through the corridors, finding his way to the old records office, a quiet, fluorescent-lit room with rows of file cabinets and one aging clerk sipping lukewarm coffee behind a desk. "I need everything on the Drummond murder," Barros said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Those files are sealed. You don't just access them without clearance." Barros flashed his badge. "This is official. I believe there may have been a wrongful conviction." The clerk's face went pale. He hesitated, then disappeared into the back. 10 long minutes passed before he returned with a cart stacked with dusty cardboard boxes. "Sign here," the clerk said quietly, handing over a log sheet. Barros scrawled his name, took the top box, and carried it to an unused interrogation room. He locked the door, shut off the light, and sat down under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The smell of old paper and forgotten truths filled the air. He sifted through witness statements, many of them contradictory. Neighbors said they heard shouting around midnight. Some claimed 2 voices, others remembered only silence. At trial, only the version that supported guilt had been used. Then he found something different. A secondary forensic report, labeled Scene Analysis, Crime Scene 2. He froze. He had never seen this file during the trial. Only the official summary had been presented to the court. He opened it. Inside, a partial footprint that didn't match Marcos Oliveira or Sergio Drummond. Traces of a forced window entry, glass fragments and pry marks on the fire escape. And, shockingly, residue from gunpowder. Barros blinked. Gunpowder? But the official cause of death was stabbing. The murder weapon was supposedly a knife belonging to Marcos. So why had there been evidence of a firearm? He read further. The report had been marked inadmissible due to chain of custody inconsistencies. It was never submitted as formal evidence. Barros slammed the folder shut. His blood burned. A second attacker. Or a gun used to threaten Drummond before the stabbing. Either way, it changed everything. Someone had buried this. He gathered the documents quickly. Walking out of the office with evidence like this could be risky. But Barros didn't care anymore. If the system wanted to stop him, they would have tried already. He approached the desk clerk. "I'm logging these as active evidence review," he said, signing his name in the registry. The clerk opened his mouth to protest, but then saw the look in Barros's eyes and stayed silent. Back in his car, Barros sat gripping the steering wheel, his head spinning. Gunpowder. A second crime scene. An ignored forensic report. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was manipulation. And it might be the key to saving Marcau's life. Meanwhile, across town, Prosecutor Gades stood at the window of his office in downtown Villa Serena, his phone pressed tight to his ear. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "We're conducting a full reassessment. The execution is paused. Temporarily." The voice on the other end was from the Attorney General's office. Gades hung up, his hand shaking as he slammed the phone back into its base. He was in damage control now. If Oliveira was exonerated, Gades' entire career could collapse. The trial had been the crown jewel of his tenure, high-profilized, televised, praised by every justice columnist in the city. And now, the cracks were showing. Phone records, financial transfers, a known fixer in the shadows, and forensic reports that somehow never made it into evidence. Gades clenched his jaw, staring out the window. Had they all been played? Or worse, had someone above him ensured the case was never questioned? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden creak of his office door. A young man stepped inside. Nervous, thin, eyes darting. Dr. Fabio Lima, one of Guedes's junior assistants. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "Journal Dachedeg is publishing a front-page exposé tomorrow morning." Gades turned slowly. On what? The execution delay, the missing evidence, the involvement of Valdir Gomes, and your role in the conviction. Guedes's face went pale. The headline was already being written. A junior associate bursts into Prosecutor Gades' office, face pale. "Inspector Barros found the missing forensic report in the Oliveira case," he says, breathless. Gades' eyes widen. "The second crime scene report?" His voice hardens. "The one I never even saw?" The young man Lima nods. "It details footprint impressions and traces of gunpowder. None of that ever made it into the trial." Gades stands abruptly, pacing with tension radiating from every step. "Get me the forensic lab on the line. I want names. Who handled that report? Who archived it? And find me Valdir Gomes' last known contacts. If he was near Villa Serena the night Drummond died, I want it confirmed or disproved." Lima scribbles notes, his hand trembling slightly. "And if we do confirm Gomes' involvement?" Gades pinches the bridge of his nose, the weight of 5 years crashing down on him. "Then we've possibly condemned an innocent man, and we either blame the Drummond circle or admit we were misled. Either way, this just became political dynamite." When Lima exits, Gades slumps into his chair. Memories of the trial flood his mind. The partial fingerprint on the knife, the motive built around a failed business deal, crafted to sway a jury. He never mentioned Drummond's shady associates. Had it been blindness or complicity? A memory flashes. On the eve of the trial, a prominent real estate developer had praised his focus. That same man had a vested interest in keeping Drummond's deeper dealings hidden. Gades stares at his phone. Maybe it's time to get it right. Before history writes him as the man who executed the wrong person, he grabs his coat and heads out to the police data center. If there's a digital trail, calls, transactions, linking Gomes or anyone else to the murder, it might be the key to redemption. For Marcao, and for himself. Inside his cramped, dimly lit cell, Marcao sits on his narrow cot, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. The day has spun him from death to hope, yet peace remains elusive. Guards had questioned him, refiled forms, even reassigned his cell classification. Damien, his chaplain, had stopped by. Clara and Rajado had gone home hours earlier, and now sleep refused to come. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. A correctional officer paused outside his bars. "Oliveira, you awake?" Marco sat up. "Yes," he said quietly. The officer gave a small smile. "Just wanted to say, I'm glad you're still here. Word is you might be innocent." A flicker of warmth passed through Marcao. "Thank you," he murmured. When the officer walked off, Marcao laid back down. His mind flashed back to the day he first saw Rajado, then a scrawny mutt, tail wagging behind a shelter gate. We were both caged, he thought. But the dog got out first. Eventually, exhaustion took hold. For the first time in years, he drifted into a deep, undisturbed sleep. The rattling of keys jolted him awake. "Oliveira!" a guard called. "We just received orders. You're being moved out of max security." The pre-hearing holding wing. Markow blinked in disbelief, his pulse quickened. "Have your things ready in an hour." Freedom, the word pulsed through him like voltage. A gray government transport truck pulls into a side entrance of the Villa Serena District Forum. No press, no protesters, just quiet marble floors and fluorescent silence. 2 guards escort Markow, still in cuffs, into the building. On a bench outside the courtroom sits Clara, dressed in jeans and a sweater, hair tied back in a ponytail. She sees him and bolts from her seat. "Markow!" she exclaims, grabbing his hands before the guards can object. He notices the drool stain on her sweater. Rajado must be waiting nearby, probably in her car. "You okay?" she whispers. "I'm better than yesterday," he replies, his voice steadier than it's been in years. "We're going before Judge Amaral," she explains. "Barros is here, and, believe it or not, Guade is helping. He's submitting the missing forensic report." Markow stares, stunned. "Guade, helping?" Clara shrugs. Maybe he realized it's bigger than just saving face. "If the court accepts the suppressed report," she adds, "they could grant you bail or drop the charges altogether." He squeezes her hand. "You've been up all night, haven't you?" She swallows hard. "A million nights, if that's what it takes." The bailiff appears. "We're ready for the hearing." The room is heavy with silence. Judge Amaral sits tall behind the bench, face unreadable. Markow is led to the defense table, where a new public defender, Dr. Noguera, sits beside him, freshly appointed after Markow's old attorney retired. Across the aisle sits Prosecutor Guedes, noticeably devoid of his former arrogance. Behind him stands Barros, folders in hand. Director Ferraz is there too, flanked by 2 advisors from the governor's office. Once rivals, now seated on the same side of history. Judge Amaral surveys the room. "We are gathered today to urgently assess new evidence relating to the conviction of Marcos Oliveira. Mr. Guedes, as prosecutor of the original case, please proceed." Guedes stands, clears his throat. "Your Honor, since the execution was stayed yesterday, several critical findings have emerged. First, phone records place Valde Gomez, a known enforcer, within a mile of the crime scene at the time of the murder. Second, we have located a forensic report that was never submitted into evidence." He holds up a file. "This report includes footprints that don't match Mr. Oliveira and gunpowder residue inconsistent with the murder weapon. There is also concern that the partial fingerprint on the knife may have been transferred from a prior encounter." A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Judge Amaral narrows his gaze. "Are you admitting this evidence was withheld?" Gaze hesitates, his voice a mix of guilt and resolve. "I can't confirm who suppressed it, but it never reached my office, or the defense." Given this, the state no longer stands firmly behind the conviction of Mr. Oliveira. Behind Markow, someone exhales, a sigh of disbelief, maybe Clara's. Markow remains frozen, trying to absorb the weight of the words. Judge Amaral turns to the defense. "Dr. Noguera, do you wish to respond?" Dr. Noguera stood tall. "Your Honor, the defense formally requests the immediate annulment of the verdict and the full release of Mr. Marcos Oliveira. The evidence submitted undermines the very foundation of the original prosecution. Any new proceedings should only follow after proper review." Judge Amaral shifted his gaze between defense and prosecution. "Mr. Guedes, does the state object?" For a moment, silence lingered. Guedes adjusted his tie. His voice, usually sharp, now trembled. "No, Your Honor. The state does not object. We withdraw our support for the original conviction." A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Amaral leaned forward, his gavel poised. "Then I see no legal reason to continue the detention of Mr. Oliveira." The motion is granted. Mr. Oliveira, you are hereby released under your own recognizance. Unless new charges are brought forth which as of now appear unlikely, you are a free man. This court owes you an apology for the injustice you've endured." The gavel's second crack echoed like a gunshot in Markow's ears. Handcuffs were removed. He stood frozen as the courtroom erupted. Clara rushed forward, tears spilling down her cheeks, and wrapped her arms around him. Behind them, even Barros and Ferraz exchanged quiet nods of relief. Guedes, though haunted, seemed lighter. Markow felt the shift in his very soul. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer the condemned. He was free. Markow and Clara emerged into the sunlight, reporters swarming at a distance. Clara clung to his arm, gently steadying him as if he might drift away. Across the parking lot, Clara's pickup truck waited, and from it Rajado burst forth, barking, tail wagging, a blur of joy and fur. The dog jumped into Markow's arms, knocking him slightly back. In Arcos Alegres, onlookers clapped. Some cried. He buried his face in Rajado's fur, the last 5 years pouring out in muffled sobs he no longer cared to hide. He and Clara didn't speak to the press, not yet. They needed space. Time to breathe. Clara drove slowly, savoring the rhythm of freedom. Markow looked out the window like a stranger in his own hometown. Shops had changed. A new tower blocked the view of his old apartment. Everything felt fast, foreign. "The world kept moving without me," he muttered, pain flickering in his voice. Clara reached across, resting her hand gently on his. "I'm here," she said softly. "We'll figure it out together. You've got time now." He nodded. Rajado dozed in the back seat, peaceful and safe. They pulled into a modest one-story home with a tiny courtyard. Inside, boxes lined the walls, a quiet reminder that Clara had built her life while he was gone. She showed him the spare room, half cleared. "I can move out," she offered, "but if you want to stay—" Markow stopped her with a look. "No, don't change a thing. I'm just grateful I'm not behind bars." She smiled. "You'll need clothes, and sleep, and, eventually, 1,000 conversations. I just need one thing," he said gently. "A moment." She stepped back, her eyes shimmering. "Take all the time you need." Marco sat on the bed, Rajado curled beside him. He gazed out the window at the backyard. Grass, a wooden fence, and a garden next door. The ordinariness stunned him. He ran a hand over the dog's fur. "We're together again, boy." A buzz. Clara's old phone. A new message from an unknown number. "There's still a target on your back. Drummond's partners know you're free. Be careful." Markow stared at the screen. The joy of freedom faded slightly. The nightmare wasn't over. But he had survived 5 years on death row. He wouldn't live in fear. He pocketed the phone and walked into the living room where Clara was making tea. He sat down beside her, shoulders square. The next chapter had begun, uncertain, yes, but filled with light. A flurry of press headlines. Wrongfully convicted man freed. Drummond conspiracy deepens. Inspector Barros, now hailed as a whistleblower, leads a new task force exposing corruption. Arrests roll out across the city. Dirty cops, officials, even a former judge. Markow wakes from a nightmare. Sweating, breath shallow. In his dream, he was led back to the death chamber, no one telling him the sentence had been suspended. He stumbled into the kitchen, hands shaking. Clara looked up from the coffee pot. "Nightmare?" she asked gently. He nodded, sitting down. Rajado nuzzled his leg. "Yes," he whispered, "but I woke up, and I'm still here." Clara pulled out a chair and gently sat across from him. "I've been reading about therapy programs for exonerees. The Innocence Project has some resources, too." Before she could finish, Markow raised his hand with a soft firmness. "I know you mean well. I just need some time. Let me take the first steps my own way." She nodded, honoring his need to heal on his own terms. "Of course. But remember, you're not alone anymore." "I know," he said quietly, offering a faint but real smile. That afternoon the phone rang. It was Barros, his voice carrying more excitement than Marcal had ever heard from the normally stoic inspector. "We've located and arrested Valdir Gomez. He was hiding out on a remote property with a fake passport. Once we complete the evidence chain tying him to Drummond's death, your name will be cleared. Beyond any doubt." Marco's heart pounded in his chest. "Do you think he'll talk?" "Not yet," Barros said, "but we're not letting him slip away. And one more thing, people are starting to talk about reparations. Don't be surprised if the state comes forward with a compensation offer." Leaning back against the kitchen wall, Marcao's voice turned low. "I don't need money, Barros. I just want my life back." "I get that," Barros replied, sincere. "But sometimes that's the state's only way of saying they're sorry." As he hung up, Marcal felt a strange emptiness. No amount of money could return what was taken. 5 years of birthdays, holidays, the quiet warmth of Clara's presence. Priceless losses. But at least the truth was finding its voice. 2 weeks later, under intense questioning, Gomes broke. He confessed. Drummond had been on the verge of exposing corruption tied to powerful interests. Gomes had staged the murder using a knife already known to bear Marcal's fingerprints, an artifact from his past. Behind him were 3 affluent businessmen tied to the Villa Serena real estate empire. The revelations rocked the city. The public prosecutor's office launched a full-scale investigation exposing a web of bribery involving police officers and even judges. Guedes, disgraced, publicly apologized to Marcal in a televised press conference. "I did not knowingly suppress the second forensic report," he stated. But his career had already withered under the weight of his silence. Marcal watched the broadcast with Clara's hand wrapped tightly around his, and Rajado curled at his feet. His name was finally cleared. But this wasn't a moment of pure triumph. It was bittersweet, a win steeped in what could never be recovered. One crisp morning, bathed in the golden light of dawn, Marcal walked with Clara and Rajado along the pebbled trails of Ribeirinho Park, a place that once symbolized dreams, now reclaimed from grief. The air was fresh, unfiltered by prison walls. For the first time in years, he wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, blending in as just another soul savoring freedom. Clara glanced sideways, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You okay?" He nodded. "I still get the nightmares, but this helps." She leaned into him, her eyes misty. "We're thinking of getting another dog. Rajado deserves a buddy." Marco smiled, a soft, broken-in kind of smile. "Maybe we start with just one step at a time." They paused by a quiet stream, watching the water ripple with unhurried certainty. From a distance, Barros approached in casual clothes, offering a slight wave. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Marcal welcomed him with a nod. Since the trial, a bridge had quietly formed between the two men. Barros knelt down to pet Rajado, then turned to Marcal. "The complaint's been filed. All 3 businessmen have been arrested. The network's falling apart." Marcan exhaled deeply. "Then it's over?" "Maybe not entirely," Barros replied. "But the biggest pieces have fallen. Villa Serrania owes you every part of it, and so do I." Marco looked down at Rajado, then up at the inspector. "We can't rewrite the past, but we can shape what comes next. If you really want to make things right, keep investigating. Don't let what happened to me happen to someone else." Barros nodded. "You have my word." Clara stepped forward, a letter in her hand. "We got the offer," she said. "Compensation for 5 years of wrongful imprisonment." Marcal gave a small shrug. "Money's not everything. But maybe we could use it to start fresh, somewhere with a big yard, for Rajado. Maybe even launch something, a foundation for the wrongly accused." Clara's face lit up. "That's a beautiful idea." He took her hand. "I don't know if I would have made it without you. Or without this dog. You never left my heart," she said, her voice trembling, "even when it got too dark to see." He pressed his forehead to hers. "No more wasted time. Rajado barked once, tail wagging, urging them forward. Together they walked into sunlight, into future. Their footprints marked the path. A man, a woman, and a dog who had once been lost. Survivors of silence and injustice, now symbols of hope. Because the story of Marcos Oliveira didn't end with the clang of a judge's gavel. It lived in Clara's unwavering love, in Rajado's loyalty, and in the stubborn courage to speak truth when others chose to look away. And sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes everything, but the quiet ones that refuse to give up. The weeks after the courtroom release were filled with unexpected quiet. No more echoing cell doors. No more institutional routine. For the first time in over 5 years, Marcao woke to the sound of birds instead of steel. He learned, slowly, how to live again. Each step was small, figuring out how to shop for groceries, how to hold a bank card, how to trust silence without fearing what might fill it. But Clara was there, so was Rajado, who never once strayed from his side. And so, little by little, the world began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place that could be claimed as home. One evening they returned to Ribeirinho Park, the same winding trail where he had once imagined freedom but never tasted it. The sky was streaked with lavender and gold, and the stream ran with a quiet rhythm. Clara walked beside him, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, filled with snacks and a notebook. She had started writing again, something she'd stopped after his conviction. "It's funny," she said, stopping to watch Rajado splash through the water. "You think when justice happens, it'll feel like fireworks, but it's more like finding breath again." Marco nodded, picking up a flat stone and skipping it across the surface. "It's quiet, but it's real." They sat down on the grass. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Marcao had started volunteering at a local community center, helping former inmates with re-entry. At first, he wasn't sure he had anything useful to offer. But then a young man, no older than 21, showed up, in wrinkled clothes and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in years. Marcao offered him a sandwich, then a conversation, then eventually a ride to a job interview. That's when he realized the best way to honor the pain he'd endured was to ensure others didn't face it alone. Meanwhile, the news media moved on. The scandal had burned brightly for a few weeks, headlines about corrupted officials, bribe trails, hidden reports. But like all fires, it cooled. Gaze retired from public life. Inspector Barros was promoted. 3 of the implicated businessmen faced charges, while 2 fled the country. But for Marcao, justice wasn't about punishments. It was about restoration. He declined to sue the state. The offer for financial compensation had been generous, more than most people would earn in a decade, but he saw it as something else entirely, a seed. He used part of the funds to open Casa de Segunda Chance, the House of Second Chances. It became a small center for the wrongly convicted and their families. Therapy, education, legal resources. A place where people could cry, rage, and eventually breathe again. He often reminded new arrivals of a simple truth. Freedom is not the same as peace. You have to work for peace, every day. It was that ethic that drew attention, first from a documentary team, then from schools, then from people who had nothing to do with the legal system, but who were searching for a story that reaffirmed their faith in people. The story of Marcos Oliveira became a book. Not one written by him, he didn't like the spotlight, but by Clara. It sold modestly, but changed lives. Letters began arriving, from prisoners, from judges, from mothers who said they now looked differently at the headline. And somewhere along the line, something else shifted too. The lesson was simple but profound. Justice must be rehumanized. It cannot only live in codes or verdicts. It must be carried in how we look at people, in how we listen when someone says something isn't right, and in the courage to admit we've failed. Marcos, once a name buried under accusation, became a symbol of redemption. Not because he wanted to, but because he showed that dignity could survive even the worst betrayals. He and Clara eventually moved to a modest home on the edge of Villa Serena with a fenced yard for Rajado and, soon after, a rescue puppy named Espera, which means hope in Portuguese. The two dogs became inseparable. Like sentinels, they guarded the perimeter of a life rebuilt. One autumn morning, as golden leaves blanketed the street, Clara asked Marcao if he'd consider telling his story at the local high school. "I don't know," he said, sipping coffee. "I'm not a speaker." "You weren't a prisoner either," she replied gently. "Until you were. And then you weren't." That week he stood in front of 90 high school students, some sleepy, some skeptical, all curious. He didn't dramatize anything. He told the truth about the power of assumptions, about what it means to lose time you can never recover, and about the things that saved him. One woman, one dog, and one stubborn detective who refused to stop digging. When he finished, there was silence. Then applause. Then, slowly, students began to come up. One handed him a drawing of a man and a dog. Another asked how to become a lawyer for the wrongly accused. That night, he and Clara stood on their porch, watching the stars blink above them. He wrapped his arm around her. "I'm not the man I was before prison," he said. "No," she agreed. "You're more." And in that moment, beneath a sky vast enough to carry every forgotten name, every buried truth, every story yet untold, they stood as quiet proof that even the darkest chapters could lead to light, if not by fate, then by faith. Because some stories don't end with a gavel or a headline. They end where they begin again, in love, in struggle, and in the quiet revolution of choosing hope.